the issue for Vance is that he came into this campaign as really just a guy who did a complete flip-flop in terms of his. A couple of years ago, he was just the harshest critic of Trump. Now he, of course, is a lapdog.
Welcome to you both. Now, VP debates rarely move the dial, but this is a strange election. It's very close, and the running mates are strong characters in their own right. So maybe it will have an impact. What do you think, Ben?
It's an election where, in particular, when it comes to the Democrats, voters don't know that much about Kamala Harris. They don't know that much about Tim Walz. They're sort of new characters. I agree with you that basically the history of vice presidential debates is they only matter when they go horribly awry and when people are really unprepared for them. And it seems unlikely. These are both pretty experienced politicians and debaters that'll happen. But I think there will actually be a lot of attention on it, from regular people. The debates have been very, very widely watched.
What's your overview of it, Paul?
I think that's probably correct. I mean, if anything, we've been reminded this year that these debates are hugely consequential. I mean, we're a visually oriented society. We read less, pay attention to image more. We look at how these candidates look and what they say. We saw Biden, of course, had to drop out after his terrible performance in June. And of course, Trump's performance a month ago with Harris talking about the people eating cats and dogs and that kind of thing. So these debates are really consequential. And I think Ben made a really good point about how these candidates, at least on the Democratic side, are largely undefined to voters, which of course ups the stakes for these debates even further. So tonight's slugfest between Walz and Vance could be consequential, though likely not in a healthy, positive way. It all comes down to what they say, how they say it, and how they look.
And again, something strange, Ben, in this strange election. Normally, when we have a VP debate, there's still a couple of presidential debates with the top of the ticket to go. But it's possible, as I understand it, that this could be the last debate of the presidential election of 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I think in part because the debates are so consequential, Donald Trump basically decided not to give Kamala Harris another one. She both showed him up in a certain way. The contrast, just in terms of their ages, their coherence, was bad for him. And it was an very high-profile opportunity for her to introduce herself in an unfiltered way. And I think right now what you see, if you turn on, I was watching American football last night, and you are just deluged with television advertising that tells you on one hand that Kamala Harris is for you. On the other hand, in the words of a Trump ad that was basically focused on attacking transgender rights, that Kamala Harris is for they, them, and Trump is for you. And I think a lot of what Vance will try to do is to associate Walz and Harris with the most unpopular left-wing moments of 2019, 2020, and the kind of progressive social movements with the really with the civil unrest in Minneapolis when he was governor. And because I think that's that right now, at least, is the Trump-Vance strategy, which is just to basically disqualify them as dangerously left-wing, as associated with the most unpopular left-wing ideas.
Is there any chance, Paul, that Vance will do what Trump noticeably failed to do in his debate with Harris, which is stick it to the Harris-Walz ticket on the issues?
Well, I think the issue for Vance is that he came into this campaign as really just a guy who did a complete flip-flop in terms of his. A couple of years ago, he was just the harshest critic of Trump. Now he, of course, is a lapdog. And what we're going to see, I think the social issues is what will drive Vance's performance tonight. I mean, it's all about immigration, the ads that I think everybody has seen on the transgender operations for prisoners, this kind of thing. They're really using these wedge issues to drive people apart. That is the entire focus of the Trump campaign. So I think that's what we're going to see from Vance tonight, more of these wedge issues. He's going to try and leverage that as much as he can. I think that the Trump ads in general, that we're seeing. They're painting Harris and by extension her running mate as these far out lefty loonies who don't get how people really live. That seems rich to me, given Donald Trump's own background. But nevertheless, I think that's what they're trying to do.
I guess, Ben, Vance will have to try and cut through Walz's folksy Midwest demeanor, and Walz will have to try and stand up his claim that Vance is weird.
I think that you basically described what I anticipate from this debate, which is Vance trying in a very sort of focused way to attack Walz on very specific policies, and Walz saying, you know, buddy, I don't know what you're talking about, but did everybody hear that insane thing he said last week? Because Vance, and to some degree Trump's vulnerability here, I mean, Walz and Harris are very vulnerable. Both of them took very progressive, very left-wing stance, particularly in 2019, 2020. That's real. That's not made up. But J.D. Vance has also reversed himself on basically everything he ever stood for, and has a record of saying really kind of trolly, deliberately provocative stuff that Walz, I assume, will just sort of pull out of his back pocket when things start going awry.
Paul, something puzzles me. I mean, it seems to me, I think you just said it, that the Trump campaign is kind of stuck in a rut and has been for some time now. Trump is beginning to sound like a broken record with the same old shtick again and again. I get the impression even the cult is a bit fed up with it all. And if what I'm saying is largely true, why is Harris not pulling away much more?
Well, I think that's such an interesting point. I mean, Harris, for her part, still has not really, to use perhaps a rather trite expression, she's not really closed the sale with a lot of voters who still are not quite sure who she is. She's got 5 weeks to convince them. But in terms of Trump, he simply has not been able to expand his base. One reason why is he keeps reverting to what he's comfortable with, these personal attacks. Harris is mentally disabled, this kind of thing. His advisors have been telling him for months and months, please stick to the issues. Talk about inflation and immigration. He simply can't do it. He wavers and goes off script and just rants about these things. The personal attacks, I think it wears thin with a lot of people. You read these stories about folks sometimes drifting away from his rallies a bit early. Even in the background while he's speaking, you see people yawning, this kind of thing. He is not doing a good job, I think, of expanding his base. He's never gotten more than 46, 47% of the electorate, and these perhaps are reasons why. So they've both got problems. Trump is not able to broaden his base. Harris still has the issue of trying to define herself in a way that will close the deal with voters who at this point are still sitting on the fence.
Ben, you've covered American media for a long while. In terms of where people are going to for their news and comment and analysis, is the mainstream media still holding its own, or is there now a clear ascendancy of social media and alternative media in this election campaign?
You know, I would say the big story is really fragmentation. I mean, almost nothing big is ascendant. Lots of small things are ascendant. On any given day, one TikTok account might be the thing that, in particular, when Harris launched, sort of drives people's perception of the campaign. But I would say, like, the mainstream media is weakened, is smaller, but it's not being replaced by anything in particular. It's being replaced by a fragmented landscape in which, you know, these outlets like the New York Times remain the most powerful individual players, the New York Times, Fox News, but weakened from where they were last time, with nothing in particular coming up to replace them. Outlets like Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, you know, on the right, you know, a new group of left-wing outlets, they're about the same size they were last cycle too, and lots of individual voices, lots of noise has come in to replace them. Lots of attention and time spent on TikTok, which is, you know, very powerful, obviously largely organic, reflecting what young people in America are interested in, but also totally opaque in terms of, to outsiders, what's going on there and how are decisions about promotion being made.
Paul, do you think the mainstream media in America, is it holding its own in this election campaign? Is it still where people are going to find out what's happening and to get their news and opinion?
Well, it's really a generational thing. I think among younger people, social media clearly is where it's at, although older folks are on Facebook, less so on Instagram. But I think the fragmentation theory, I think, is a good one. There's something else that I think is quite noticeable in this campaign. I think this is really, although this has been around forever, I think this is the first campaign where you can really say that it has been dominated to a huge extent by this ugly scourge of disinformation. I think we're seeing more of that now across a lot of these smaller platforms that Ben mentioned, where perhaps people have the ability to just post whatever they want, hit the send button, and it can just ricochet around the world rather quickly without being fact-checked, that kind of thing. There's just a tidal wave of stuff that's simply not true. You could name a subject. I'll give you an example of either an extreme distortion, something that's not been placed in proper context, or just a bald-faced lie. And of course, it's a waste of time, I think, to try and argue facts with voters about this simply for the reason that their entire knowledge base, if you can call it that, is their foundation for their views is predicated on of falsehoods. To them, though, it's their North Star, and study after study shows if you try and expose them to anything different, anything that's factual, they tend to dig in their heels. People do not like to be told that they are wrong. I think that is really something that needs more attention. This is a huge issue in this campaign.
It's a bit depressing too. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you both for coming on the show. I hope we can get back to you as the campaign progresses. That's my thanks to Ben Smith, Editor-in-Chief of Semaphore, Paul Brandus, Editor of the West Wing Report.